Hello again, baseball fans, and welcome to another episode of the MLB Draft Weekend Review. I am your host, Kris Dunn, joined as always by my good buddy Joe Doyle, fresh off of a weekend of fun in the sun, both Joe and myself. How you doing, Joe?
I'm good, man. Kris, it's good to see you. I think we're both sporting a little bit of sunburn here in March, so it's good to be back.
I think we're probably drawing a stink eye or a little evil glance from half of our viewers, wondering how the heck are you getting a sunburn in late March? But
I think it's freezing on the East Coast right now, but I'm up here in Seattle, and even I was able to find some sun. So, yeah, never safe.
I don't really have to go too far. Obviously, the friendly confines of Florida, where the sun is, around every corner every single day. But let's get into week 6 now. We're, I guess, a month and a half. So I guess we could probably say pretty close to the halfway point.
I think so. Yeah.
Right around the halfway point of the college baseball season. So certainly a lot has changed when you look at the top 25 ranks, right? There's a new team. Mm-hmm. There's a new number one team in the country that we have not seen as the number one team in the country all year. That being said, we've talked about them quite a bit.
Rightly so.
And how well they've performed. They were at the Shriners Classic, performed really well. We talked about a couple of their key prospects and their performance at the Shriners Classic. So I guess, Joe, let's just get right into it. And let's talk about the new number one team in the country, the Tennessee Volunteers. And here's a quick look at some of their their grouping of prospects ranked. Those numbers that you see there on your screen, those are their ranks currently inside our Prospects Live top 400 for the 2022 MLB draft. Now, before you get too comfortable with these numbers, I will also say that the top 400 will be updated this week at prospectslive.com. So keep an eye out for that updated top 400 rankings coming out later this week. But Joe, for right now, here's a look at the 6 players on the Volunteers roster that are currently inside our top 400. And just what do you have to say? What sticks out the most about these guys to you?
You know what's insane about this Tennessee team is they haven't even seen Seth Halverson yet. They haven't even seen Blade Tidwell yet. And Tidwell actually got in some bullpen work this weekend as a potential emergency reliever. So it would appear he's a couple weeks away from rejoining the Tennessee rotation, or at least, becoming an arm that they can use. And Halverson's a little bit further off, but they expect to see him this year too. I mean, Drew Gilbert missed 6 or 7 games with a bad hamstring. This team hasn't even been at full strength yet, and they're just blowing everyone out. I mean, and they took Ole Miss to the woodshed this weekend. I mean, it's such a complete team. When I'm looking for a team that can go deep into Omaha, I want starting pitching, and I want someone dynamic in the bullpen, right? Like Kevin Kopps last year. Ben Joyce is kind of that guy. He throws 103, 104 out of the bullpen. You throw that guy into the game in the 8th or 9th inning, and it's over. Jordan Beck is arguably one of the top 2 or 3 college outfielders in the country with massive power, and he's hitting more this season. Drew Gilbert, in my opinion, is the perfect 2-hitter for any college team. He can run. He's got power. He hits. He plays a solid center field. And then, Trey Lipscomb is a senior. He's come on, and he's been arguably one of the top 10 or 15 just pure hitters in the entire country this season, hitting over 400, I think still, with 10 homers. So, you work your way through this lineup, and there's no breaks. It's all gas. It's just totally relentless.
So I thought it was awfully fitting that Ben Joyce came in at number 103.
Yeah, that works.
on our Prospects Live top 400 rankings. I wonder if you had even noticed that when we were obviously adjusting these, because these were just updated a couple weeks ago. But let's talk a minute about Joyce, because look, yes, great. He throws 102, 103. He throws over 100 miles an hour regularly. If he throws 17 pitches in an outing, there's a good chance that 13 of those pitches are over 100 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. So all of that is great, but we're talking Major League Baseball draft prospect here. And so at the next level, it's great that you can throw 100. It's great that you can throw 101. But what is going to make Ben Joyce successful at the next level? Because you can't just throw 101 miles an hour right down the middle. At the major league level, guys are going to adjust and guys are going to make you look silly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really boils down to the secondaries, and that's kind of the case with most pitchers, right? But I think for a guy that lives and dies on the fastball, you're going to be able to you have to keep that slider around the zone. And at this college level, we've seen some guys take some swings at his slider when they're in the other dugout. These guys gearing up for 103 and getting a slider, it doesn't matter where it's going, they're swinging. So he's got to be able to spot the slider, or at least keep it around the zone at the big league level for it to be a weapon. And then he has shown a low 90s changeup that frankly has been pretty nasty when he's been able to keep it in the zone. So it'll come down to the changeup. It'll come down to the slider, but I still think the arm is so talented that we'll see him in 2023 at the big league level at the latest. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's not going to, he's not going to start. So he really fits that mold of, if you got a guy with good bullets and healthy bullets, use him while you can, because these guys that throw 103, 104 miles an hour, they just don't do it until they're 28 years old. So, use the talent while you got it.
So it's interesting that you say 2023 at the latest at the big league level. Oftentimes there's always this question of, is there a guy that gets drafted that will make his major league debut later that season, right? And everybody wants to try to find the one guy who's capable of doing that. I remember a couple of years ago, Durbin Feltman, when he was drafted, was that guy. And, there was questions, will the Red Sox bring him up later on in the season? Is Ben Joyce a guy that, we could be looking at as the first player to make his major league debut and possibly in the 2022 season?
It's possible. I think he is the profile that would best fit it. He's a reliever. There's no starter potential. I mean, realistically, there's no starter potential. He's an older prospect. The thing that I keep going back to is they moved the draft back a month, so with the draft being July 17th, you really only have about 8 weeks after that of Major League Baseball. So you kind of got to deem when you pick him, is this guy MLB ready? And if he is, maybe he sees 2 weeks of minor league baseball just to, for the team to get their eyes on him. But I'm guessing that whoever drafts Ben Joyce, if they think he has a shot at being in the big leagues this year, they know it on draft day.
And what about Halverson, right? You mentioned, we haven't seen Seth Halverson pitch in a volunteer uniform. Obviously, the transfer from Missouri, 72 innings pitched last season at Missouri, 70 strikeouts. The 4-2 records, 6.0 ERA. Like, okay, fine, whatever. What do volunteer fans have to look forward to with Halverson? Or I guess what do Major League Draft Scouts look at when looking at Halverson?
Yeah, he throws 100. I mean, he's another guy at Tennessee that just so happens to throw 100. He's got more of a riding fastball. It's a straighter four-seam fastball. He works in a curveball, slider, changeup. He's actually more of a starting pitcher profile. But from everything I heard at Missouri, it just wasn't working because he didn't have a plan. I'm not going to say he wasn't coached well, but I don't think that he put himself in a position to actually succeed and understand his arsenal to the best of his capabilities. And I heard, in the fall and in the spring, a lot of that had actually ironed itself out for the Volunteers. So I'm excited to see what they've got in Halverson. Because it's this late in the season and because he's not going to be able to be built up, I would guess that he's going to be a relief option for the team later on this summer. But still, as a pro prospect, I mean, he's like 6'2", 205. He's barrel chested. He's stronger than an ox. Throws 100 with 4 pitches. It's kind of hard to ignore that. And
then both Jordan Beck and Trey Lipscomb were, on the rise from our top 300 to when we put out the top 400. And in the case of Trey Lipscomb, he was unranked inside the top 300. And then when the top 400 was dropped and updated inside that 300 at 247, do you see, I guess, foreshadowing to the release of the updated top 400 later this week, is there a chance that these guys are still on the way up? Certainly maybe in the case of Lipscomb, who has a lot more room to go. Maybe not so much the case with Beck because he's already in at number 21.
Yeah, I mean, Beck is, there's, like you said, there's not much further to climb. And the same with Gilbert. I mean, he missed 3 weeks recently, so it's kind of hard for him to take a huge step forward. But Trey Lipscomb is going to take a bit of a jump. The biggest thing with Lipscomb that is really difficult to evaluate is his age. I mean, he's a little bit older than some of these other prospects, and therein lies the fact that he doesn't have the leverage that some of these redshirt sophomores or true juniors have. And when you have that, like a Jacob Melton, we've talked about him a million times, or Ben
Right.
Metzinger at Louisville, it just makes draft day a little bit more confusing for the older players. So he is moving up. We do still think he is rock solidly going on day 2, and you'll just have to wait and see where he lands.
All right. And so last question here. And before we move on from Tennessee, they've got a big 3-game set this weekend against Vanderbilt. They have 1 loss currently on the season. Next week, when we come on the air and we do this show next week, how many losses will this Tennessee team have?
They will add 1 loss to their
this
record.
weekend.
Yeah,
So
they'll get a couple of wins, but they will add 1 loss.
So they'll take 2 out of 3 from the Commodores this weekend.
Yeah, and you know what? Another thing, a guy not listed on that, Chase Dolander, they're
Right.
I think he's actually their Saturday guy now. He might be the best college pitcher in the 2023 class. The team is and they've got Chase Burns, who might be the best pitcher in the 2024 class. I mean, Tennessee right now has it's an assembly line of pro starting pitcher prospects that are representing.
We could be looking at least for this year and the next couple of years, possibly the best team in the SEC.
I think so.
In a very powerful SEC, Tennessee could be the best team in the conference.
Yeah, I think their coaching staff, their recruiting, ever since they got in there, Vitolo he's turned it into a powerhouse.
So let's move on to another SEC guy. And looking again, the top 400 will be updated later this week. So we're going to kind of go through. I've got some guys here that I want to talk to you about and kind of get your sense on, where they're at right now. Are they going to be on the rise, or are they going to be falling a little bit? Are they kind of staying pat where they are? And one of those guys is outfielder at Florida, and that's Judd Fabian. Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of, at this point, we all know who Judd Fabian is. Everyone knows the name, right? He was drafted in the 2nd round from the Red Sox, but entering the 2021 season, there was talk that Fabian could have been the number 1 overall pick. And then obviously not a great 2021 season. He falls. The Red Sox draft him. He doesn't sign with the Red Sox. He goes back to Florida. Now he's having a pretty good season. Do you think that Fabian could find himself getting drafted higher this year than he did last year?
I think so. Judd is pacing himself. And by the way, he's hitting 287 after kind of a rougher weekend, but he wasn't striking out. So he was actually well over 300 if my memory serves correct. But here's the thing. Judd Fabian is tooled out of his mind. Okay. He's an above average runner. He's an above average center fielder who's going to stay in center field. He's got at least plus raw power. He's got a solid average arm. The question with Judd Fabian has always been, is he going to hit? Is this guy going to hit enough to actually be a big leaguer? Because you can't go into a draft with a 30% strikeout rate. I mean, that suggests you're going to be a 36% strikeout guy in the pros. So kudos to Fabian. He's got that strikeout rate down into like the 18% region right now. And if he can sustain that, if he can sit right around 18%, I think he's got a pretty decent shot at finding himself picked on day 1, somewhere in that 20 to 35, 36 range. I think he makes a lot of sense. Listen, he checks every box. He just needs to put the ball in play, and that's what he's doing so far.
Looking at another outfielder that garnered a lot of hype heading into this season. I think there's a lot of question marks about what the finished product would be like, but that's Brock Jones, outfielder on the West Coast at Stanford. What are your thoughts on him so far this season?
Yeah, listen, there comes a point in every season where you have to take a step back and you have to fill out a progress report. You got to figure out where these guys are at, right? And we decided that this past week is kind of where we were going to do some big movers and shakers. Now, we're not going to push out a top 500. It's a little too early for that, but Brock Jones, he jumps off the page right now as struggling a bit. Now, he's been hot. He's had a good couple of weekends now, but you're talking about a center fielder who's only got 2 home runs, and the pull side raw power is kind of one of his calling cards. He doesn't have a great arm in center field, but the most concerning thing with Brock right now is he's running about a 27% strikeout rate. And for a guy that isn't hitting a lot of home runs and he's not a superstar in center field, you can't have a 27% strikeout rate. It was high last year. It was like 24% last year, but he also ran like a 19% walk rate. So I got to see Brock Jones put the ball in play a little bit more, and I've got to see the power start jumping off the page. And if that happens, I think he's pretty comfortably a day one pick. But you got to perform.
Yeah, heading into the season, Brock Jones came inside the top 10.
Yeah, he was number 9. Yeah, I distinctly remember.
Yeah, so the original top 300, he came in at number 9. Obviously, you mentioned the struggles a little bit. Are we looking at a case where he could potentially be playing himself out of the first 2 rounds, or do you think he's kind of in there no matter what, and it's just a matter of how high up he can get onto one?
No, it could certainly happen. He could certainly play himself out of the top 2 rounds. Right now, I don't see that happening. But you look at last year, you look at a guy like Alex Spinellis. Alex Spinellis was a top 15 prospect on every board going into February. Right. And he really struggled. He really struggled to perform. His strikeouts crept up. His defense at third base came into question, where he eventually moved to first base. Brock Jones, like I said, Brock Jones he's an 80 makeup guy. He plays a decent center field. I wouldn't call it, a plus center fielder. I don't even know if you could project him to stay there for sure. He might move to left field. The bat has got to pick up. If things move at the trajectory we're at right now, which I don't expect them to, but if Brock Jones is a 275 hitter with 4 home runs, 12 stolen bases, and a 27% strikeout rate, it's hard to imagine that profile going in the top 2 rounds. That being said, I do think he's going to play his way into that range still.
So we just got done talking about a couple of outfield prospects heading into the 2022 draft. But one of Judd Fabian's teammates we've talked quite a bit about. And guys, if you want to get your questions in, we're going to get your questions throughout the show. So be sure to put those questions in the comment section and we will address them on air. And so that being said, we've got one question we'll kind of get to right now. And again, this kind of pertains a little bit to one of Judd Fabian's teammates. And so that question comes from Joe Chapman. Joe saw Keith Law's list come out today. Cam Collier in at number 5, Sterling Thompson, who is that teammate of Judd Fabian, in at number 11. Joe, what are your thoughts on this here? Collier 5, Thompson 11.
Yeah, Collier's a bit of I would say he's a kind of a divisive prospect, but not in a, maybe polarizing. Polarizing would be a better way of saying it. We have Cam at the back of the first round right now, and let me tell you why. Everyone compares him to Bryce Harper, but Bryce Harper hit 480 with like 37 home runs at the JUCO level, right? Cam Collier's season is about 2/3 of the way done, and he's hitting 326. He's got 6 homers. He's not striking out a lot. He's not walking a bunch, but it is important to keep in mind he's only 17 years old. The raw tools are there. I mean, he's certainly a player. But I think at the end of the day, there's going to be enough teams that say, he didn't tear up the JUCO ranks when he was down there. And I know he was 17, but he didn't, blow us away with anything. And so for that reason, I think Collier drops into that 15 to 30 range. But for anyone to have him as a top 5 prospect, I totally get it. Age is on his side. He's got the raw power. He's got the throwing arm. It's a little rich for my blood, but I totally get it. In terms of Sterling Thompson, I think and we talked about this last week, I think. We talked
about him quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, the issue that Sterling Thompson is going to run into is, where does he play defensively, right? Is he a right fielder? If he's a right fielder, there's a lot more pressure on the bat, and the bat's been good, but it's not a right field bat at the pro level, in my opinion. Is he a second baseman? Is he a third baseman? I think Sterling Thompson is every bit that of a first-round value. I don't see him sneaking into the top 10, but I would expect to hear his name again, like Collier, kind of in that 15 to 35 range.
All right, so let's move on to a couple other guys, and now we'll get into a completely different position, right? We went outfielder, Judd Fabian, Brock Jones. Now we'll get into a couple catchers, right? We've talked a lot about Kevin Parada at Georgia Tech throughout the first month and a half of the show, now a month and a half of the season. But there's a couple other guys, and there's another catcher within the ACC alone that, is moving up the ranks. Obviously, he made a pretty significant jump from the original top 300 up to the updated top 400. And that's Kade Hunter at Virginia Tech. So obviously you see the numbers right there. Solid start to the season for Kade Hunter. What do you think about him so far?
It's everywhere. I mean, it's a catcher who's hitting home runs, who's stealing bases, who's hitting. He's not striking out. Listen, Kade Hunter is one of my favorite prospects in this class, just because I think he has a rare skill set where he brings just about every tool to the field. It's an average, maybe, I'd say that's about right. I'd say it's an average arm. He's probably an above average athlete behind the plate. It's an average to solid average hit tool. I think it's above average raw power. He's an above average runner behind the plate, which you don't find a lot of, especially once they get up into the college level. Like Harry Ford, for example, was a plus runner, but what that kid looks like at 21 at Georgia Tech is probably a lot different. So I think Kade Hunter is going to be a top 3 round pick this year. The exit velos are huge. He's not striking out. He's drawing a ton of walks. He's stealing bases, hitting home runs. I mean, this kid, he comes from a baseball family. I think he checks just about every box. And if a team is looking for a college catcher, an advanced college catcher, I think Kade Hunter is going to be a top 100 pick.
Can you envision a scenario at all where a experimental team might look at a guy like Kade Hunter and see those peripherals and see those numbers and think, you know what? I don't want this guy wasted at the catcher position. Could he play somewhere else? Could a team, move him somewhere else because they want to get that offensive production a little bit more? And, guys tend to not produce as much behind the plate?
Maybe. I think my personal philosophy on this, and I don't know how many teams agree with me, is when you have a guy at a position he's got outlier tools, don't take him away from it, right? The fact that you can put an above average runner into your lineup at the catcher position, I think is an enormous luxury. Now, you move Kade Hunter's bat to left field or you move it to third base, there's a lot more pressure on it. He's just, in my opinion, at catcher, there's so much potential exorbitant value out of what he can do that, 90% of his peers cannot. I guess I put it this way. As a catcher, for me, he's a top 3 round guy. As a left fielder or a third baseman, he's probably a top 5 round guy.
How many stolen bases does he get at the big league level?
I'm gonna give him. I'll give him 12. His first full season.
12 stolen bases first full season.
Well, let's also assume he gets 450 plate appearances, right? He could end up being a platoon guy. Catchers are fickle.
Yeah, I often wonder too, like how you have to look back, like a catcher to get double-digit stolen bases. At what year? How many years in the big leagues at the catcher position until they go from 12, 10, 0?
Yeah,
right. Because
Russell Martin.
Point, yeah, great point. I think even didn't Paul Duca, maybe it was Kris Russell Martin. I want to say Paul Duca had some years with stolen bases too, but that's what happens. Your knees catch up to you, and you're like, oh, I don't understand. Like it's only 3 years in the big leagues. No, we're talking about guys that are 25 years old. That means they've been catching. They've been playing the position for 17 years, 18, 19, 20 years.
Right.
That's a long time. Your legs just can't hold up. So another catcher, Ole Miss, another SEC guy here, Hayden Dunhurst. Season maybe not going as he would have hoped, maybe not going as a lot of people would have hoped. Certainly those fans of Ole Miss. Let's talk about Dunhurst a little bit here.
Dunhurst, he was beat up a little bit early in the season with some injuries, and he's still trying to work his way back from that. At the end of the day, you're graded on your performance. I understand that Hayden Dunhurst has an elite throwing arm, but there are guys that have had elite throwing arms that have fallen in the draft as well. I look at Casey Opitz last year. Casey Opitz fell into that 5th or 6th round territory where he was a plus defender with a big arm. Dunhurst has just got to hit. I had some concerns coming into this season about him being extremely pull happy. I think he was like 48% pull or 52% pull last year. And once you run into advanced pitching, favoring one side of the field that heavily can get you in a little bit of trouble. But that really hasn't come into play yet. The issue is just Hayden Dunhurst isn't hitting. He's not putting the ball in play with authority like we thought he would. So I'm really hoping to see him bounce back a little bit here in the second half of the year.
All right, so we went through with a pair of outfielders and now a pair of catchers. Before we get into, we got a couple pitchers that we'll talk about. And again, guys, the reason that we're talking about these guys is the updated top 400 MLB draft prospects. That updated list will drop later this week. So we're going over some guys that may have been on the rise and maybe are sort of plateauing. Some guys that are continuing to rise, and possibly even some guys that, had high hopes entering the season, but now are maybe not performing to, expectation. I guess expectation is kind of a harsh way of putting it, but maybe not having the season that they would have hoped and could see themselves falling down the potential top 400 list. But before we get into that, we're going to go back out to the questions here, and loyal viewer and follower of the show, Sean Murphy, always has good stuff for us here. So Sean Murphy has a question about the 2023 class. Obviously, a lot of what we talk about here on the show, Joe, is the 2022 class, but always, looking ahead, the 2023 class, is there anyone in that class that has taken a jump in the first half of the season? And then I guess also looking at Brooks Lee, is there, has Brooks Lee cemented himself inside the top 5? I think I can probably answer that one for you and say no.
Yeah,
I think
definitely no. Too early for that.
Yeah, cementing yourself inside the top 5. That's like Bryce Harper, Steven Strasburg type territory.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're there with anybody, but certainly a name that was inside of our top 5 in the top 400. I just wouldn't say that he's cemented. What do you say?
I think there's a lot of college bats in this class that it really will just boil down to, what's your flavor? And I think Brooks Lee is exactly that type, like high contact guy. A lot of, nothing outstanding in terms of the tools. So we'll wait and see where Brooks Lee comes in. The hit tool is so special, and he plays shortstop, that I think he's got a good chance of going in the top 5, but nothing is locked up. In terms of 2023, we actually mentioned him already. Right-handed pitcher out of Tennessee, Chase Dolander. I think we had him like number 27 on our top 100 or top 200 2023 prospects. I would say Dolander's probably a better fit in the top 12 now, top 15. He's looked really good. I would expect Dolander to move up boards. And then a couple of, like Chase Davis, the outfielder at Arizona, has looked really strong. We had him just outside of our top 50, if I'm not mistaken. And just kind of thinking back, those two really jump out for me. I think Nolan Schwanel at Florida Atlantic is moving up. Yeah, so listen, the 2023 class is it's tough to talk about now because what these guys do now is important, but what they do on the Cape is even more important. And then what they do next spring is going to be what is ultimately going to place them. So right now, guys are just kind of jockeying for positions on boards, but it doesn't really mean anything just yet.
So the initial top 100 of the 2023 class, Chase Dolander was in at number 27.
Yeah. So I would say he's moved up. He's cut that
quite
in half.
a bit. Yeah. Any other guys? Here's a question, and another loyal listener to the show, Kevin Gallo. Do you see another Trey Sweeney type player that comes out of nowhere and lands himself in the first round?
So I was thinking about this earlier this week, and this is I think this is an especially tough question because the more you do these boards and the more college baseball and amateur baseball gets more eyes on it, the more public this entire thing goes. I think the guys that are hidden are they're just tougher to find. Like we were aware of Trey Sweeney. I think we had Trey Sweeney in the top 100 in like February. I mean, we were well aware of him, well aware of how athletic he was for the position. And he just kind of worked his way up. You look at this year, and I would say Ben Joyce is certainly a guy that has now proven to be healthy, and the stuff is everything that we thought it was going to be and more. He's worked his way up into that top 2 round conversation, probably a third rounder. We'll talk about another guy here who I think has come basically out of nowhere, and he's moving his way high up into boards. But I think it's going to be really tough to point out guys that maybe it's just from my chair because we've been looking at these names for months to sneak up on us. So yeah, I guess tough question for me to answer. Just there's nobody, I'll put it this way. There's nobody that has snuck up onto our radar on our team that we had absolutely no idea who they were on the college ranks and vaulted their way up boards yet. Not that we didn't know about preseason.
Right. But certainly, again, like you mentioned, I think you bring up a really good point. None of these guys are going to come out of nowhere for us. They're not names that we've never heard before, but to a lot of people that only pay attention to the prospects the month or so leading up to the draft, right? It's almost like cramming for a midterm.
Yeah.
You know, you try to get as much knowledge as you can the week, the 2 weeks, the month leading up to the draft. Some of those guys might not know some of these names. But certainly when you mentioned putting these top 400 lists together, there's not a single name on the top 400 that's going to come out of nowhere because you've been looking at them for so long.
I'll say this, like, so if you want kind of a similarity, if I had Trey Sweeney at like 90 or 110 before the season last year, and that's, I think, where about we had him. Genuinely, I mean, I would watch out for Kade Hunter because as he gets more and more hype, I think the ability to draft a tooled up catcher, maybe that sneaks up into the top 50. I don't think he has a carrying tool that can get him up into the top 20 like Trey Sweeney did. But that's the type of guy that went from outside of our top 300 coming into the season just because he's never played. He's always been hurt. To a guy now that I'm like, okay, maybe this fits in the top 75.
All right, so we're going to get to your questions a little bit later on. Mike Furr, if I'm botching your name, I apologize. Mike Furr, Joshua Hulgan, stay with us. Be patient. We'll get to your questions in a little bit. But before we get to those questions, Joe, let's keep it moving. I know we went over a couple outfielders. We went over some catchers. Now let's get to the arms, right? I know you mentioned a couple minutes ago a guy that could be climbing the ranks and to some people might be coming out of nowhere. And I think I know who that guy is, and he's going to be listed here. I don't think it's this guy right here because we've talked about him quite a bit, and I don't think he's coming out of nowhere at this point for anyone. But Gabriel Hughes at Gonzaga certainly putting in a really, really fine season. And again, we talk about the arms at Gonzaga, and over the last few years, we're talking about a school here, a small school, not a D1 powerhouse, but one of those schools that has shown the ability to put out some quality arms.
Gabriel Hughes has been money seemingly every week. He's striking out a ton of batters. He's limiting his walks. He just looks like one of the top 4 or 5 college pitchers in this class. And I wouldn't even say that he is rising up the board too much as he's just affirming what we thought coming into the season. I think in the top 300, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had him about number 34. I could be totally wrong on that. I think I'm just guessing. I think we had him about 34, and then he moved down to about 44 recently, and then a bunch of players just vaulted up, right? Like up into that, like the Sterling Thompsons and the guys like that. They just worked their way up above him, and it moved him down into the 50 range. But in this re-rank, he's going to be represented much better than that. I do think Gabriel Hughes is a pretty good bet to go in the top 40 or, day 1, 30 to 45 picks. So he's checked every box.
And then the arm that I think we're really going to be, I guess, bestowing upon people that might not have heard of.
Yeah, this is a good one.
This is the guy. There it is. This is the guy for you right here, the UCF or the USF Bull, Orion Kirkering.
Yeah, Orion Kirkering was a bit of a standout on the Cape Cod League, and credit to my team of evaluators, the evaluators at Prospects Live, Brandon and Jackson and Will and Ian. They've all seen him now. This is a kid to believe in, I think, and that's coming from those guys. He's going to take a pretty substantial jump in our re-rank. You're talking about a fastball that's been up to 97, but averages close to 95. He's got a plus curveball. He hasn't had to show the changeup yet. He's thrown 12 of them. I don't think any of them have been remarkable. Probably a fringe average offering, but smaller guy, 6'1", 185, 190 pounds, really good athlete, quick arm. I think it's the type of guy that, could end up throwing 99 or 100 as he gets stronger and he continues to mature into his body. So I want to say he was in the, you know what? I don't even want to guess where he was on the top 400, but I can tell you.
169.
Yeah, 169. So he's going to take a pretty substantial jump in the re-rank this week. I think South Florida fans should be excited about this kid.
Are we talking about the top 100 jump?
Yeah, he'll be represented in the top 3 rounds. Yeah.
And then also another prospect, since we don't talk a lot about USF, Orion Kirkring, obviously, but then they've got another prospect that's kind of climbing the ranks a little bit, not in the top 400 right now, but that's Jack Jasek. Another arm that could. And
a third, Jack Jasek, Orion Kirkring, and then they have also got another kid over there by the name of Gabriel Rinconces, who is really good too. South Florida has a really good stable of players. They're going to be well represented on draft night. That's for sure.
Going to have to get out and go check out some of those games. Obviously, being
those
half an hour away.
Those Florida schools, aside from the, you get rid of the Florida States, the Floridas, Central Florida and South Florida and Florida Atlantic, those schools are loaded with talent, and they have only gotten more and more talented the last few years. So if you live in that area, definitely go check it out. There's a ton of pro prospects in there.
Yeah, FAU, FIU, Florida Gulf Coast, all good schools. And then lastly, one prospect on here. So we did outfielders, we did a couple catchers, some arms. And now here's a guy that, for a while played for the number 1 team in the country, no longer the number 1 team in the country, but certainly his draft stock has probably risen throughout this season. And that is Ivan Melendez, the power hitting DH/first baseman for the Texas Longhorns.
Yes, sir. The Hispanic Titanic. So he was drafted last year. He decided not to sign. I believe it was with the Marlins in the 15th round or 19th round. Melendez was interesting. You will not find a player in college baseball that hits the ball harder. Bar none. This kid's the top of the mountain, right? But last year we were talking about like a 30% strikeout rate. That has come way down, and we'll see if that survives Texas's slate of games. If it creeps back up over 25%, he'll fall back down the list. But for now, I want to say he's about 18 to 22%. I don't have that information in front of me. He's walking a ton, and he is just killing the ball. 13 homers. He's on pace for a 25 home run season. He's hitting 402 for a guy that had strikeout problems last year. If this continues, listen, he's limited. He's a first baseman. He's a DH. I've actually seen him take reps at third base. I think it is at least doable in a late inning. We need a guy to handle third base. We'll see where his body goes, but I think Melendez has a chance to be like a top 3 round pick as just the ultimate slugger. He's the biggest bat in this class. I don't think it's even remotely close.
Do we think, right? So we talk about relief pitchers are typically the ones that profile as the first player to make their debut. Could Melendez be that first bat to possibly make his debut?
Really
in
doubt
one of those pinch hit roles?
Maybe. I tend to doubt it. Hitters with swing and miss issues generally take a little bit longer to develop, and you don't want to throw them into the most advanced stuff without totally derailing their development. So I think he's going to be I wouldn't go as far as to say a project, but if he stays on the pace that he's on right now, he's probably not going to see the big leagues until at least 2024, more than likely 2025, depending on how his swing and miss issues or I guess capabilities move into pro ball.
All right. So I know there's a couple guys out there that have been patiently waiting. They've had some questions in the chat, so we're going to get right to them. Mike, your time to shine. Joe, I know that we typically are not big fans of comps, right?
Yeah.
Comps are kind of a little bit, oftentimes they can be lazy. And oftentimes I feel like it's
dangerous.
And it's just unnecessary, right? Like you're constantly saying, like we had talked about earlier, Elijah Green comping to Bryce Harper. Like, come on, seriously? Are we really doing that? That's a little unfair to Elijah Green. So all that being said, there is a question in the chat, and we want to give everyone the opportunity. If you have a question, we're gonna give you the opportunity to ask your question, and we'll address it and we'll answer it on air. So, Joe, here is a potential comp question here. Obviously, Chase Petty's name has been in the news recently, having been traded from the Minnesota Twins to the Cincinnati Reds. So what about this comp here?
So, I mean, they have the similarities in that they both throw 100. They're both from New Jersey. They both got a sidearm drop and drive release. I mean, if you want to talk about similarities, like at the time they were 18 years old, there's actually some pretty good similarities. And I think, no, Muley just turned 18. So here's the difference. Chase Petty could fill up the strike zone, and Chase Petty knew where a plus slider was going. Muley he throws just as hard. I mean, he's 98, 99. He's not going to hit 104 like Petty, but he's 98, 99. He's got the same two-seam fastball. The slider isn't as good. The command isn't as good. I don't personally think the delivery is quite as clean as what Chase Petty was. So I think Muley is going to have some suitors in the second round, but he doesn't have the same ceiling or safe starting pitching ceiling that Chase Petty did. It's a little bit more reliever risk with Muley, but it wouldn't surprise me if he went much earlier than any of us expected. I mean, the kid he's a freaky athlete with a really good arm, and sometimes those guys go a lot earlier than we think.
Chase Petty went what?
He went 19, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so Petty went 19 overall. Muley's not going to work his way. He's not going to work his way that high, right?
I just don't think he throws enough strikes, and I don't think the secondaries are quality enough. There's just a lot more reliever risk there.
Is he going to get traded before? He's
committed to Miami. I wouldn't be surprised if Muley ended up at Miami
instead.
We'll see. Yeah, but that would be I guess it was 2 years ago. Miami landed Victor Medeiros. Very similar type of arm. Medeiros was up to 97, 98 when he landed in Miami. Hasn't really worked out for him. He went to Oklahoma State, but I mean, it's kind of a similar profile to that. I think Muley throws a little harder.
All right. And then another question here from Joshua Hulgan in the chat. We've talked about LSU's offense, and we've talked about Jacob Berry quite a bit this season. But again, here, the defense for Jacob Berry, I don't think we're really boosting his draft stock based on his defensive profile. I think he's kind of where he is, right?
He's a bat.
Yeah.
I mean, Jacob Berry is going to get picked for his bat. I don't think any team is going to bank on what they're seeing on defense. And just to that point, like, pretty solid defense in quotes. All of these guys are athletic enough to make the routine plays. It's not the routine plays. It's the balls that he has to run for. It's the backhand. It's the forehand. It's the moving of the feet. He's just not he's not a natural athlete. Not as natural as some of his third base counterparts, his peers that he'd have to beat out for the third base job, the full-time professional third base job, or even right field. And so that's kind of what you need the barometer to be. It's not, can he do it? It's, in professional baseball, can Jacob Berry beat out XYZ? And I think most people in the industry have come to the conclusion that without significant progress and development, which is possible, he's probably a first baseman. That said, the bat is very real. It's just how much are you willing to pay strictly a bat?
Do you think, obviously, the new CBA being agreed upon and the new universal DH with the American League and the National League, obviously there's going to be a positive impact for the guys like Jacob Berry, right? This pretty much doubles your employment opportunities, if
Yeah.
you will, right? I mean, if a National League team were to draft Jacob Berry, the chances of him getting called up, or certainly within the first couple years, would be very difficult because they don't have that option of a DH. Now they do. Do you think moving forward, and I guess this is more just a Major League Baseball question, not a Jacob Berry question, but do you think that we're going to see a lot more younger guys like the Jacob Berry molds get the opportunity to come up and be a DH at a younger age?
It's possible, but I would actually counter with how many guys do you see come up in the American League that are strictly DHs get a shot?
Sure.
It's just it's actually, I think in terms of free agency it makes a lot of sense, but when it comes to the draft and it comes to like minor league prospects, generally a minor league prospect that is a DH only, um, you don't see him come up and get shots. Like I look back at like Curtis Terry this year with the Rangers. I mean, what is he, 26? Those guys just don't come up if you don't have any defensive value whatsoever. So, bigger deal for free agency, probably less so in terms of the draft.
Yeah, and to further your point there, I think what we see most often, and I don't necessarily think this will change, I think we'll just see it with more guys. You see the veteran who is a position player who's
Exactly.
aging, he's kind of aging out of the position, a la a Justin Upton type, who's no longer very good in the outfield. And what are you going to do with him? Well, let's give him some DA. Obviously being on an American League team already, but in the mold of a Justin Upton, or even a guy like an Andrew McCutchen, who isn't
Exactly.
quite as good as he once was in the outfield.
I mean, what would you take? And I don't know. When I think of the question, I think, would you rather have a 24-year-old unproven prospect that has
Right.
no defensive value whatsoever, or would you rather have uh, I'll keep it local, a 31-year-old Mitch Haniger who has 5 years of a track record of hitting 30 bombs, hitting, big league pitching? It's just those opportunities don't really exist too much. Even Yoshi Tsugo in Pittsburgh could play first base. Daniel Vogelbach in Milwaukee, and when he came up with Seattle, they tried to play him at first base. Like, these guys need some sort of defensive value. And that's not to say Jacob Berry doesn't have that value, because I do think he could be at least a fringe average to average first baseman.
Yeah, for sure. All right, guys, if you want to get a couple last minute questions in, certainly we're here for them. The top 400 will be updated later on this week. So if we can get a couple more questions in, we will do so. We'll get those questions answered for you. But Joe, I guess, what are you looking forward to this weekend? Obviously, we talked about Tennessee and their big 3-game set with Vanderbilt. What other things are you looking for this weekend as we head into week 7?
So, the storyline that I have been watching closely, and I know this is kind of minutia, but the Daniel Susac, Kevin Parada race, like, who's
Sure.
the better college catcher? On one hand, you have Daniel Susac, who's hitting like 408. He like leads the country in doubles, but he's not showing a ton of game power. Kevin Parada, but he's a better defensive catcher. Kevin Parada has had like a 6 or 7% strikeout rate with a ton of homers. So I like watching that race. I think they're both going to be top 10 picks. They're both extremely impressive.
I think the catcher position is one that we've talked about quite a bit. Obviously, you mentioned
Yeah.
those two guys, but even the outfield race, right? Like, I mean, I know a couple of weeks back there was someone that asked the question, who's the first outfielder taken? Or we even talked about the Gavin Cross. Will he be the first outfielder taken?
Hmm.
Um, has your opinion changed at all about the outfielders? I know we talked about Tennessee having some good guys there in the
Yeah.
outfield.
I think some have been really good. Some have been like Gavin Cross for me has been good. He hasn't been spectacular, but he's been good. Um, I think Chase Dolander has been very, very good. He's beaten up every single opportunity he's had outside of that Florida State series. If I were to take a guess, and if I were a betting man today, I would expect the first college outfielder to be Chase Dolander or Jordan Beck. I think both of them have a pretty good shot of going in the top 10.
All right. And so I know this next question here is going to be, I think I know the answer right away, and kind of a difficult to not have this immediate answer. But the question here from Azad Earl: does Josh Kasevich have the best hit tool in the
No.
class? Right.
No, and not even all due respect to Josh Kasevich. No, he's been a great hitter this season, but like pure hit tool, if you're going just pure hit tool, like there's a kid at Charlotte by the name of Nate Furman. He's a second baseman out there. He's got 21 walks, he's got 6 strikeouts, and he's hitting 440. So give me Nate Furman.
All right, and then we've got a couple more before we get out of here. Another one here from Sean Murphy. Had a chance to see Peyton Graham at the Shriners. Lots of physical projection. How do you stack up? How do you rate his season so far?
Up and down, streaky. I like Peyton Graham a lot. I think he'd be if you really believe in your player development system and you think that you can get this kid maximizing his bat. I think Peyton Graham is a top 15 type prospect. He's not going to be there for us. He just swings through too many fastballs. He swings through too many pitches. It seems like he sacrifices at bats with a poor approach at time, just going up with swing, swing, swing. So I'd like to see him kind of firm up and approach at the plate and just give himself a shot to hit things that are in the center of the plate. So had some big hits, some big home runs. He's great body, runs well. Not at all a complete project.
Came inside the top 50, landed in at number 35 on the top 400 that was released about a month ago, several weeks back. He's going down, I would imagine, correct? He's not going up there.
If he is, it's mostly by virtue of other people passing him. Right. The thing is, like, Peyton Graham is that guy that I still think with a hot streak could go in the top 10. I genuinely believe that, even with his 25% strikeout rate. There's just not a lot of guys that project like Peyton Graham.
All right. And then appreciate the questions, Sean, as always. And then last one I think we'll get to here, Joe. Kevin Gallo in the chat has a question about the 2023 class and a high school kid in Jackson Holiday. Can he stick at shortstop? And is he on the rise on your board? The back end of that question, is he on the rise on your board? Yes.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Can he stick at shortstop?
So the reason Jackson is moving up on our board is we wanted to see how he competed in a tournament in Arizona against some really hardy competition, and he just blew the doors off the place. Barreled up balls, 4 for 5, 5 for 5, 3 for 4. I mean, he can really hit. I think he can stick at shortstop for the time being. I don't think he's going to be there when he hits his prime. He's lower half heavy, and he's kind of got a lunch pail build, not in a bad way, but just he's really strong kid, barrel chested. So I think he's going to end up at third base, probably, kind of like a Jake Cronenworth build. I think he's probably going to end up at third base by the time he's 27. But if that kid debuts at 21, you get 5 or 6 good years of him at shortstop. He's not a special defender at shortstop. Cronenworth is actually a decent comp, I think.
All right. So I know I said that was the last one. We're going to do one more just because we have a couple more minutes. And I think this one's kind of interesting. Again, nobody knows what the number 1 overall pick is going to be like. No one knows. Anyone who sits down and tries to do a mock and, everything changes, especially with the way that teams look at the slot value and they try to manipulate slot values. So it's anyone's guess, but a couple of guys who have been talked about inside that top 5 range and certainly could draw some potential number 1 overall consideration. Here's a good one here. It seems like the Baltimore Orioles are always a team that are up there. They're, year in and year out picking inside the top 3 or certainly the top 5. Brooks Lee, Chase Dolander.
If I know what I think I know about Baltimore, I would think Chase Dolander is a more likely selection based on kind of the models that they have shown in the last few drafts with coveting guys that hit the ball really hard. Brooks Lee is a very good hitter, but he doesn't hit the ball especially hard. Chase Dolander might be a really good hitter who hits the ball very, very hard. So I mean, if I were a betting man, they do need prospects that fit on the dirt. If I were a betting man, I would say Chase Dolander is probably a more likely pick, but I would be stunned if they did not take Drew Jones right now.
At number 1 overall.
I would be stunned. I just think Drew Jones is so much better than the next best prospect in this class. I mean, I genuinely believe Drew Jones is the closest thing to a superstar prospect this class offers.
Here's a question for you. Having said that,
yeah,
what happens first? Drew Jones makes his major league debut, or his father gets inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Kris. That's a great question. What year of eligibility is Andrew?
Oh yeah, great. So now 4? you gotta put me on the spot.
Well, hey, there's numbers I put you on the data.
Spot, and now
okay, I will say. Listen, Andrew Jones needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yes,
I'll say Andrew Jones gets in before his son debuts, but I do think Andrew Jones is going to be another one of those year 10 guys, which is a shame. And I think he's only on God, I have no idea what year he's on. So yeah, that's my guess. I think Drew Jones is he's not a complete project either. He's super projectable. He's probably not going to see the big leagues till 2025. I think Andrew Jones gets in 2024 or 2025. That's my guess.
All right, so I'm going to look at this. His numbers have gone up. So it looks like his first year of eligibility, I believe, was 2018. So 18, 19, 20, 21.
So this will be year 5. That is so close.
It's so close,
That is such a good question, Kris. All right, so I'm going to change my answer. I'll say Drew Jones debuts first because, unfortunately, I think Andrew Jones is going to be a year 9 or year 10 guy.
So in 2021, Andrew Jones received 33.9%.
Yeah, that's not
75.
Close.
That's still a long
ways away with good players coming. I think you get Andrew Jones in the Hall of Fame in 2026, and I think Drew Jones makes his debut in 2025.
It's a shame that Andrew Jones is a guy that we're talking about being on the ballot for 10 full seasons. For my money, I have a hard time naming
even guys with star potential. So I get I get the Scott Rowland thing, just because Scott Rowland and Jeff Kent, not a sexy player, not
but
a
Andrew
big
Jones
market
was better.
Star. Well, that's my point. Andrew Jones was a star. He was a staple. He was it was Ken Griffey Jr. defensively, and then it was Andrew Jones and Torrey Hunter, and Andrew Jones was a better hitter than Torrey Hunter.
Yeah.
So he was I don't really understand why he's not in already.
I think one of the things is, and maybe we'll see as some of these guys age, they eligibility out, if you will, right? They lose their eligibility after 10 years, or certain guys get in. I think if we start to see the new guys entering the ballot and none of them are really surefire Hall of Famers, I think that's when you'll start to see a guy like Andrew Jones's numbers jump up quite a bit. But again, you're right. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's only got 6 more years of eligibility. So
yeah, I think he'll get in. I mean, he's at a good spot. Edgar Martinez was way lower than where Andrew Jones is. So it's a numbers game.
I'm going to put this one out there. I'm going to put this one out as a poll on Twitter because I'm curious.
That's a good question. It is a great question.
What will happen first? I'll put this as a poll out on Twitter and give you guys the opportunity to vote on this. What happens first? Andrew Jones gets into the Hall of Fame, or his son Drew Jones makes his major league debut? I like it. We'll get that one out on Twitter after the show. I'll give you guys a chance to vote on that one. But that's going to do it for us this week, Joe. I appreciate it as always. Guys, again, the top 400 draft prospects will be updated, and we will have that at prospectslive.com later on this week. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. We'll have a lot of great content and information regarding that update throughout the week on Twitter, and as always at prospectslive.com. Next Monday, we will be back to break down week 7 in our MLB draft weekend review. So until next time, I am your host, Kris Dunn. Thank you again, Joe Doyle, as always. We'll see you guys next week. Take care, everybody.